the last chord of darkness. Near the coast, where the sea gently kissed the shore, there was a small town, as if hidden from the world. It was shrouded in the magic of the night, which turned it into a fairy tale place. When the moon rose above the horizon, its soft silver glow spilled over the streets, covering them with a shining veil. The lights of the lanterns, flickering in the silence of the night, reflected in the water, and it seemed that the city was coming to life. Their dance on the surface of the waves resembled a living picture that was constantly changing, as if the city continued in the sea. This town breathed peace, and its inhabitants seemed to be separated from the worries of the world. At night, silence reigned here, broken only by the gentle sound of the surf and the rustle of the wind playing with the leaves of the trees. There was a feeling that time had stopped in this place, and serenity itself became its eternal master. The people who lived here were too busy, their minds were occupied with work, and at night they fell into their beds from exhaustion. The violinist Albert also lived in the town. His melodies, full of joy and hope, merged with the rustle of the waves, near which he created his works. One day something terrible happened in the city. The body of a beautiful young woman, Amanda, was found by the sea, her face frozen in fear. Her body was lying exactly where people often saw Albert playing his violin. The townspeople, horrified and furious, accused him of murder. They didn't listen to his assurances of innocence. The crowd decided for him. He was executed that evening. The next night, music emerged from the depths of silence. The gentle, piercingly beautiful melody of the violin, together with the sound of the waves of the sea, enveloped the city like a blanket. It was so calming and gentle that people fell asleep to it, forgetting their worries. They even started to like it, thinking it was a nice joke by one of the townspeople. But this illusion hid a shadow that was just waiting to happen. Over time, the residents noticed that they began to experience strange symptoms. Fatigue, headaches, weakness, and chronic illnesses became more acute. And these symptoms only increased. There were the first cases of elderly people dying in their beds. No one understood what was happening, but fear forced them to take at least some action to find the cause of their suffering. The first thing that came to their minds was that this melody was the cause. The next night, they joined forces with the community and began to search for the source of the melody. It seemed to come from everywhere, from the very air. People looked for it in the forest and among the houses and even on the seashore, but in vain. They could not determine the source of the melody. It seemed to come from everywhere. When the morning sun, as if reluctantly emerging from the horizon, began to flood the city with warm light, the city seemed to come to life after a hard night. But among the usual morning sounds and bustle, for bodies were found on the streets. None of them had a hint of old age, but the sight of these people made the blood run cold. Their bodies seemed eerily desiccated, as if all their life force had been torn from them to the last drop. This discovery shrouded the city in a thick fog of fear and anxiety, as no one could explain what had happened to them. Realizing that there is no logical explanation for the deaths, they decide to call an exorcist, hoping that he will be able to explain the nature of this phenomenon. Darkness enveloped the town in a thick blanket as the exorcist began his ritual. The burning candles cast trembling shadows on the walls of the old chapel, near which frightened residents gathered in the square. Their faces were pale, their eyes full of fear and despair. The melody, which had begun in a faint way, now sounded louder, piercing the air with an eerie wail. It wasn't just a sound. It was a cry, desperate and all-consuming, which seemed to be alive. The exorcist pulled out an ancient spell book from behind his back, and his voice broke into a rasp as he recited the words of the Latin incantations. But something went wrong. The clouds over the city thickened, forming ominous figures that seemed to stare down at the inhabitants with hatred. The wind howled with such force that the windows cracked and the candles went out, leaving the ghostly light of the moon to seep through the stained glass windows. And then, in the midst of this chaos, space ripped open, revealing a great shadow in the air, high above the city. Albert. His figure was translucent, but at the same time so clear that the blood ran cold in my veins. His eyes, like two bottomless wells, blazed with hatred. He spoke. His voice was deaf and echoing like thunder, and every word echoed in my temples with pain. You condemned me to death for sins I did not commit. Now your blood is the payment for mine. Until the one who killed the girl for whom I was falsely put to death confesses and is put to death, I will take your life with a melody that will never cease." His last words dissolved in a sharp explosion of sound. People screamed. Some hid their faces in their hands. Others rushed to the chapel door to hide there. But in fact, at that moment, panic fear enveloped everyone. The exorcist, kneeling down, exclaimed that the curse could only be lifted when the true killer was found and punished. However, it was like a doom. Panic gripped the townspeople, and the silence that followed after the vision disappeared was even more frightening than the screams. The following days were a nightmare. Suspicions grew like weeds. People who had trusted each other all their lives now avoided eye contact, whispered in dark corners, and accused each other of a crime. Neighbors turned into enemies. The city, once quiet and peaceful, now looked like a courtroom where everyone could be a victim or an executioner. The melody did not stop. It sounded at night, breaking the will, taking away health. People began to disappear, as if dissolving into the shadows, leaving behind only the echo of the scream. And more became clear. Albert was not joking. His anger was absolute, and if someone didn't find the truth, it would consume everyone. People gathered in the square, lit candles and addressed the void, asking Albert to stop playing the tune. However, there were no results. Once again, while in the square, they saw a figure appear in the night sky, glowing with a bright light. It was Amanda. She was floating in the sky, illuminating the darkness, and suddenly another figure appeared next to her, dark, almost ghostly. It was Albert. Their souls spoke to each other for a long time. Amanda begged him to stop the curse and forgive these unfortunate people. But Albert, blinded by hatred, did not agree. He wanted justice and was ready to do anything to achieve his goal. Then Amanda did the unexpected. She offered her soul, pure and bright, in exchange for the lives of the townspeople. Her sacrifice amazed Albert. He realized that his anger and desire for revenge had turned him into the very evil he was fighting against. At that moment, a bright flash illuminated the sky. The clouds dispersed, and the city was once again under the gentle light of the moon. The melody stopped. Albert's soul could be seen to disappear into the endless darkness, dissolving like fog from the first rays of light. Amanda was left alone, her glow fading as if she were giving up the last of her energy to keep the peace. The inhabitants of the square, frozen in fear and fascination, watched her sink to the ground. Her feet barely touched the stone slabs, and she fell to her knees like a crystal statuette, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. People cautiously approached her, holding candles that shivered in the night wind. Amanda looked up, now full of sadness but also relief. Her voice was soft, but each word was like a bell ringing. "You are saved. Remember that even in the deepest darkness there is room for light. Don't let your hearts be filled with hatred like his." Her body began to dissolve in the air, turning into billions of small fireflies. They rose up to the sky, leaving behind a light trail of silvery radiance. And when the last sparkle disappeared, the sky was once again covered in deep night. A few days later, a woman was found hanged in the city. There was a note on her desk, "Forgive me if you can." People understood everything. She was the real killer of Amanda. But the town was never the same again. Like and subscribe to see more fascinating stories.